Hi, Mr. A here. We're going to be talking about one and two-step equations. If you remember, the first thing that we went over is the reciprocal. And that's just a fancy way of saying the multiplicative inverse. So multiplicative, long word, but all it means is we are going to be multiplying. So something is going to get multiplied. In fact, that something is the inverse. And if we remember, I use the analogy of when Mr. A goes to the parkour gym and he doesn't, his coach tells him to do a handstand. Then, when I'm doing a handstand, Mr. A has inverted himself. Inverse just means flip upside down. Or just flip around upside down. And the where we see this in mathematics is especially with fractions. So fractions aren't a scary thing. In fact, if you see a fraction when you're doing algebra, it actually makes your life easier because all you need is its inverse. So if 2 over 3, or 2/3, is my fraction, let's say it's 2/3 x, and I wanted to get 2/3 x by itself. Some way, somehow, or I wanted to get x by itself. Some way, somehow, I need to get 2/3 out of there. But since it's being multiplied, the easiest way is for 2/3 to become 1. So let's say this is 2/3 x. Then if I multiply it, multiplicative, by its inverse, so think, if I flip 2/3 upside down, I get 3/2. Well, something very interesting happens here. 2/3 times its reciprocal, 3/2, cancels out. 3 cancels with 3, 2 cancels with 2. And I'm left with 1 times x, or simply x. And I said cancel, and I do it real quick. And I think I'm going to show you exactly what's happening. 3 divided by 2 times 2 divided by 3, or 3/2 times 2/3. What happens is that when you multiply fractions, you just multiply all the way across. So this is actually 3 times 2 divided by 2 times 3. Easy enough. Multiplication, it doesn't matter what order you go in. 3 times 2 is the same as 2 times 3. So this is actually the same as 2 times 3 over 2 times 3. And now we break it up one more time. 2 divided by 2 times 3 divided by 3. 2 divided by 2, anything over itself equals 1. 3 divided by 3, anything over itself equals 1. 1 times 1, just 1. So, long process, but remember, if I take 2/3 and multiply it by 3/2, it's going to become 1. Multiplying by a reciprocal gives us 1. Okay, that's very useful, and we're going to be using that. And other than that, with solving one-step and two-step equations, there's not much definitions to talk about, not too many notes to talk about. The best thing I can do is just do a couple of problems with you, and I'll do some of the ones that we did together in class, just so that you could watch me do it one more time. The first thing is, if I have p plus 5 equals -10, then the first thing I want to say is usually the directions will say solve this, and this is a one-step equation. Solve this one-step equation, and that just means all we have to do is one thing and we'll solve it. And by solving, it just means getting p on one side all by itself. So 5, p plus 5. How do we get 5 out of there? A lot of teachers and students say we move it over to the other side, but I'd rather think of it as we're canceling 5. How do we make 5 become 0 or disappear? The best way is to do the inverse of addition. The opposite of addition is subtraction. So 5 minus 5, that'll give us 0. And anything I do to one side, I must do to the other side of the equation. So minus 5 on this side, minus 5 on this side of my equal sign. Okay, and minus 10 or negative 10 minus 5 will give us negative 15. So bring all the stuff down that I didn't use. So p comes down, 0 comes down, equals comes down, negative 15 comes down. P plus 0, though, that's just the same as p, because 0 is nothing, equals negative 15. So solving a one-step equation just means getting p on one side by itself. So this was addition. This was a one-step addition problem that we solved using the inverse subtraction, minus 5. Okay, let's look at another. Subtraction isn't that different, so I'm not going to do one of those. Let's take a look at a multiplication one. So minus 5t equals 60. Okay, again, this is a one-step equation, so it's only going to take one step. And the thought is, how do we get t on one side of the equal sign alone? So we need to make this negative 5 times t disappear and just become t. The easiest way is the inverse. What is the inverse or the opposite of negative 5 times t? The opposite of times, or the opposite of multiplying, is division. Now let's do a different color. Is division. So if I'm multiplying negative 5 times t, I could get rid of it by dividing negative 5. And I do it on both sides of the equal sign. So negative 5 divided by negative 5 gives me 1 times t. Negative 5 divided by negative 5 gives me 1 times t. Equals 60 divided by negative 5. I believe that is negative 12? Yes, 12. So 1 times t is just t, equals negative 12. Easy peasy. So notice, here I had p plus 5, so I had a minus 5. Here I have negative 5 times t, so I divided by negative 5. We do the opposite to make t, or the variable, become alone. Just for funsies, let's do a reciprocal, because reciprocals are not too different from division or multiplication. So let's say I have 2/3 b. So this whole thing, this fraction, 2/3, 2 divided by 3 times b, equals 12. Okay, so how do I make a fraction disappear? We already talked about it. We use the multiplicative inverse. So what is the flipped upside down of 2/3? It's 3/2. So let's multiply it. Anything I do to one side, I do to the other. So I'm multiplying by the multiplicative inverse, the reciprocal on both sides. We know if I take 2/3 and multiply it by 3/2, we went over how this all just becomes 1 times b equals 12 times 3/2. You can plug this in the calculator. There's nothing wrong with that, and I'll never fault you for it. But for me, I see 12 times 3/2, and I think, well, I don't feel like doing 12 times all of 3/2. But I do know what 12 divided by 2 is. 12 divided by 2 is just 6 times 3. 6 times 3, I know that. That's 18. And I'm done. B equals 18. That's the gist of it. If I'm looking at 2 steps, then I'm just pairing up a one-step equation and a 2-step equation. Or I'm pairing up maybe addition and subtraction, or I'm pairing up addition and multiplication, and I'm doing both in one equation. So one last quick example. Let's say I have 6 minus 2/9 v equals negative 14. Okay? Now, this is a 2-step. This is a 2-step equation. Why? Because I know I'm going to have to use one of these and probably another one. So I see subtraction and I see multiplication. So I'm probably going to have to either add or subtract and multiply or divide, maybe even use a reciprocal. So the first step is always add or subtract. But remember, we want to keep v on this side. We want to keep v here on this side. So I'm not going to add or subtract it. I needed to keep it here, because if I send it over to the other side, I'm just going to have to do it all over again at some point. So let's add or subtract everything else besides v. I can't add or subtract 2/9 because that's being multiplied by v. So let's subtract 6. So I'm subtracting this time. Add or subtract, I'm subtracting 6. If I do it on this side of the equation, I must do it on this side of the equation. So I'm not going to subtract 6 here. No. Instead, it'll be on the other side of this equal sign. Okay? So 6 minus 6, 0, minus 2/9 v equals minus 14 minus 6, minus 20. Okay? So 0, that disappears. Now, all I have is the same reciprocal problem, which was I have a fraction. How do I get rid of it? Negative 2/9 v. What is the opposite of negative 2/9 v? Or the upside down, the reciprocal. It's negative 9/2 v. Multiply that on both sides. Sorry, not negative 9/2 v. It's just negative 9/2. Okay, so I multiply by the reciprocal. Negatives cancel out to positive. 9s cancel out. 2s cancel out. All I'm left with is v equals, and let's see, negative 20 divided by negative 2. The positives cancel out. 20 divided by 2 is 10. 10 times 9. V equals 90. Okay, I think those are probably some of the best examples I could give. Go over these. Try some yourself. And remember, the first step is add or subtract. The second step, whoops, didn't say it. Second step, after you add or subtract and get everything else besides the variable over, multiply or divide. Either the reciprocal or like we did here with negative 5t equals 60. We divided by negative 5 because it was negative 5 times t. I think that's about it. Mr. A out.